I want to thank the senator from Oregon for his stalwart attention to energy markets and to the concern that many West Coast residents have over high energy costs. Senator Wyden has long been a vocal critic of what's happened with the electricity market, what's happened with the oil markets when the West Coast paid higher gas prices than any place in the country. We wanted to know why. People said we were an isolated market and that's why we were paying the highest gas prices. And then Katrina happened and our prices still went up even though we were an isolated market. So he has long been a person coming to the United States Senate fighting for the consumer and saying that we shouldn't be gouged by higher prices on energy. Energy is the lifeblood of any economy. And we know in the Northwest, we saw this with Enron, when electricity markets were manipulated, everybody told us, oh, it's just a bunch of environmentalists not allowing us to do new facilities. Oh, it's, you know, this situation or that situation. Well, when we finally exposed the audio tapes, we realized that, no, it was just pure market manipulation. In fact, what we found out is that people were taking the futures market and basically making plays in the futures market while they also had the ability to affect the physical supply market of electricity. So by combining those schemes with different things like Get Shorty and Fat Boy and all these names they came up with, they were able to convince utilities and various customers that the supply was tight and that they were going to have to pay more for electricity in the future, and consequently, they ought to keep paying these high prices. Well, thanks to a lot of hard work by a lot of individuals and ultimately the Department of Justice, the Enron schemes were called for what they were, just out and out market manipulation. Now, my colleague and I, Senator Wyden, screamed loud about that situation and would have said we wish the FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, would have acted a lot sooner on that issue, and that if they would have acted in basically taking away the market-based authority that Enron had, you would have saved a lot of jobs in the Northwest. You would have saved a lot of industries. A lot of people lost their jobs, their retirement, their home over those high energy prices for electricity. Thank God the result is we were able to pass new legislation creating federal crime for anybody to manipulate natural gas or oil markets. And I should say that FERC has used that authority over the last several years to recoup millions of dollars of violations by industry officials who continue to perpetrate the same kind of scheme of going into the futures market and holding positions in the futures market and then going and taking physical supply and being able to affect the physical supply and demand. So this is something that is amazing to us from the West Coast, and I know my colleagues, Senator Feinstein, Senator Boxer, Senator Murray, we've all been on the same page. Senator Merkley has been a loud voice on this. We have been through this nightmare. We've been through this nightmare, and that's why I have to say, Mr. President, first and foremost, we find it appalling that someone would propose H.R. 1 or the Ryan budget and now want to take away policing authority from the Commodities Future Trading Commission on the type of activity that would allow them to properly regulate these markets. Now, we saw what's happened, and what we are so appalled about is it seems like it is happening again now in the oil markets. In fact, we see today on the front page of the New York Times, U.S. suit sees manipulation of oil trades. So the Commodities Commission is finally saying now, yes, we're looking at this case, and it should be no surprise of what they actually see in this case, because it's the same shenanigans that happened in electricity, the same shenanigans in natural gas. Yes, the same shenanigans is happening in the oil market. That is that the commodity agency says that in this case, there was a close relationship between the physical oil price and the price of the financial futures, which moved in parallel. So basically what happened is that in the oil futures market, these individual companies took large positions. In fact, their positions were so big, and that's why Senator Wyden has just described. If this agency would come in and set position limits, people wouldn't be able to come in and move the market in such a significant way. But at the same time, it's alleged that these companies actually had millions of barrels of physical crude oil, and that they actually had no commercial use for the oil. So here you have people buying the physical supply, again, to manipulate it and help it tie into the futures market when they don't have any commercial need for it. That is why it's so important to have the CFTC do its job on this and to interpret who are legitimate hedgers, like airlines, like farmers, people who actually need the physical supply, juxtaposed to these large institutions that are just coming in and moving the market. And so what's amazing is that at one point in time, what they had as far as physical supply for somebody who didn't even have a commercial use, at least according to this New York Times article, was that they had 2/3 of the barrels on the West Texas Intermediate exchange. So here's somebody that had the physical supply and was controlling 2/3 of it and then controlling the futures market. So they were basically making money on the upside and they were making money on the downside. That is what the CFTC is alleging in its case, and I think it's one of the first cases in which a small group of traders are being charged in the potential role of manipulation of gas prices. Well, I don't have to tell the presiding officer how critically important this is. I've been home recently and paid $4 a gallon for gasoline. Many people are starting what is soon going to be the summer driving season, and they are outraged at the price of gasoline. It is hurting our economy. People who have to commute to work every day, people whose businesses depend on reasonable fuel costs, are getting gouged over these prices. And we have federal regulators that need to be more aggressive at investigating these cases. Now, I'll say I'm very happy that the Obama administration and the Department of Justice appointed a task force. That is exactly what we need. We need every federal agency that has oversight of these markets, whether it's the physical market with the FTC or the CFTC in the commodities market, to work together with the Department of Justice to make sure that these schemes are not continued to be perpetrated on the American public. Our economy is too important to have this kind of activity continue to play the kind of havoc that it is on our system. And when you think about it, it's not as if we don't know what the scheme is. We have seen it time and time again with these other energy markets. So the question is whether we're going to be aggressive and make sure that the CFTC has the tools that it needs, that is, not to cut its funding like the Ryan budget or H.R. 1 wants to do, and that it actually takes this role and responsibility and starts setting position limits, starts the day-to-day activity, because the value that Senator Wyden and I are down here talking about is, instead of this case that now is going to be investigated, how many days did we live with the potential of higher fuel costs if this case is correct? How many days did we live with the higher cost of that? And how long will the investigation take? Versus if the CFTC was actually implementing the law and the rules that we gave them and enforcing position limits, it would be policing the market on a day-to-day basis and preventing consumers from paying 1 dime or 1 penny more than they needed to pay on high fuel costs. And the reason why this is so important, I was hoping that we would get a chart here, but I guess it's probably on its way, is that it used to be that these oil markets were for legitimate hedgers. My colleague and I represent a very robust agricultural community. We grow lots of different products in the Northwest, probably over 200 different agricultural products. We depend on the commodities markets to hedge for the future. But that market, which was created after the Dust Bowl devastated so many farmers to give them a chance to legitimately hedge, now all of a sudden is captured by these large financial institution players. It used to be that those who really needed to hedge, like farmers and airlines, controlled 70% of the market. Now they're only 30% of the market. 70% of the market are these large players, just like this was described in this article, who are people who are out there basically using their financial weight to move the market in a direction that then they can sell on the futures market to benefit from. It's outrageous. It is outrageous that our economy has to put up with this, that individuals have to put up with this. And I know my colleague from Oregon and I are going to be out here and going to be loud and consistent on this until we have the rules and regulations in place to make sure that these markets are properly policed. We don't have to wait another day. We don't have to wait one more day. The Commodities Commission could be doing this job. They don't need another legislative bill from us. They don't need another vote from anybody on the commission. They can use their emergency authority. They can implement these rules today and help consumers save on high fuel prices. So I hope that my colleagues will help us in this effort to bring up the issues and make sure the American public understands what's going on so we can bring the pressure to bear on getting proper regulation in place. I thank the President.
Would my colleague yield for a question?
Yes.
You've made a very eloquent case with respect to how this just hammers the people who need oil on a daily basis, those farmers and truckers and restaurants. And you juxtapose their situation compared to the speculators. For example, those people have a lot higher tax rate, for example, than do the speculators. So there is one advantage after another that the speculators have over the people that you and I are concerned about. Is it your understanding that the next best step to help those people who need oil, those small businesses on a daily basis, is to get the CFTC out of the regulatory swamp and to enact these position limits? Is that my colleague's understanding?
Well, if you're paying $4 a gallon for gasoline, you're affecting everybody who moves a product for business or anybody who commutes to work for any kind of distance and impacting. And I know you've probably heard, I've heard a lot from small businesses who, when fuel costs become the second largest expense, it's hard for them to continue to do business. So the CFTC, you're right, could basically enforce this by just implementing the authority that we gave them under the financial reg reform legislation that we passed. That's all they have to do. Now, I would say to them, they already have the emergency authority. They have so many tools at their disposal. I'm glad that they are investigating this case. I think this case is illuminating in the type of scheme that it might be, that the details are so familiar to you and I of how people work these schemes. But I would say that an investigation of these schemes are only going to go so far to helping the American consumer. If they take another 6 to 8 months to investigate these schemes, a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. So why not implement the rules that they have right now, put them in place so we can protect consumers, and certainly don't pass legislation here in the Senate or in the House that is going to take away the ability to stop kind of activities that drive up higher gas prices by manipulation. So we want enforcement. We want it now. We want protection of consumers, and we're going to continue to be vocal about this issue. And I thank my colleague from Oregon for joining me down here today to talk about this issue.